Good morning to you. This is Moses Sekaro. We are going through what is projected there. That is African nationalism. That is our major concern today. This is the East African Institute of Learning. We are going to be looking at the African Institute of Learning. We are going to be looking at different scopes, all different subtopics there. We are going to be looking at each and everything, how we shall be handling. And this time round, we are going to be looking at the growth of nationalism. How did nationalism try to spread within all the nations of Africa? Then also push on to other things that we shall be encountering during our course of study. We are going to be handling chapter 1. When we are looking at chapter 1 here, we are going to be able to understand what does nationalism mean and what does it talk about. When you look at nationalism, we are looking at the strong desire for oneself is determination. Talk about the desire for political, economic, and cultural independence by all Africans within Africa and those that are within diaspora. So we are talking about the strong love, desire, feeling for one's nation in order to attain social, political, and cultural independence at large. They are saying that with the African nationalism, we are going to be looking at the natural love. Talk about pride which Africans have for their countries and also continents. We are going to be seeing also stronger sentiments against the foreign denominations and the better, or what you can term as the belief that the European colonialism in Africa was of the great hindrance to Africans' economic growth and development. We are going to be seeing how the Europeans were against economic transformation or development within Africa. We say that African nationalism, that this one looks at the strong desire for self-determination. Talk about desire for political, economic, and cultural independence. How were these people were in terms of political, in terms of independence? Talk about social, talk about also political and cultural independence without the interference of the colonial masters or European powers. Then when we move on, we are going to be seeing how these African states have hated colonialism and also neo-colonialism at large. What are those things that made these Africans to stay stronger or to get rid of the Europeans or colonialists that had occupied their nations? When we move on, we are trying to see that among the factors that we are going to be considering that might have forced these people to rise or to have African nationalism for their country or desire for their nation or love for their nations or feelings. The first point that we are going to talk about is talking about explosion or exploitation of resources, and talk about oppressive colonial policies. With these colonial oppressive policies, they started way back during the 19th century and the early 20th century. We are seeing that very many countries in Africa by that time had acquired independence, apart from a few that had not acquired independence. To talk about, we had Ethiopia, then talk about Liberia. These are the nations that had not acquired independence. All these are countries that we are not under what we call the colonial rule. Now, when you look at these countries that had acquired independence, they were associated with the exploitative nature. Then talk about the oppressive policies. There are some policies that were introduced by the colonialists, and these policies were exploitative in nature to the side of the Africans. Then talk about the brutal acts, these things that were exploitative in nature or oppressive. They include what we call grabbing of African lands. I talk about Africans being crowded in the reserve camps where they were forced to settle after having snatched away their land or grabbed their land from the Africans, and also the introduction of the taxes. On top of that, they are also associated with what we call the forced African work in the mines and plantations, or what we can term as forced labor. When these people were working onto those chambers and plantations, they are associated with all those different acts. For instance, they are given little salaries, others were flogged. When I talk about flogged, I'm talking about abused or even beaten. On top of that, they are paid little salaries, and also sometimes could not eat or ate something that was little. So this annoyed the Africans and led to a stronger feeling of nationalism, where Africans had now to resist against the colonialist exploitative nature. That is one of the other things that tries to explain what forced these Africans to have a strong love for their country or rise against the colonialists. Then the other we have is what we call the rise of independent churches. When I talk about the independent churches, I'm talking about what we call the Bantu-led churches. These Bantu-led churches were formed by the Africans that had a strong love for their nations after having seen what the missionaries or the Western culture or religion had been introduced here, and which advantage it came with. Now, when we talk about the independent churches, we are talking about that these were the indigenous independent churches that were formed, that were under the leadership of African clergy that criticized the white missionaries for the being destructive, talk about abusive, exploitative in nature. This annoyed the Africans, therefore revenging into what we call the nationalistic feeling against the Africans within Africa and also Europe or within diaspora. Then the other that we can also talk about that increase the desire and love for one's country, we have the October 1937 invasion of Ethiopia by Italy. This also contributed to the growth of nationalism. Here we are trying to see that Ethiopia had survived in the early 19th century, and by the time the European colonialism started spraying the war against Italians at the Adowa or the Battle of Adowa in 1866, and this witnessed that the victory was in the hands of Ethiopia, that became a major factor to the strong love for African countries, or to draw inspirations towards the other Africans that were within Europe, that having seen that Italy was trying to fight against Ethiopia, therefore the Ethiopians emerged as the winner or escaped neo-colonialism. Then they had to put her on the world map and made her to be proud of all the Africans that there is one nation that had defeated Italy and became internationally humiliated and nasty. The desire of revenge against Ethiopia, where she had the war in October 1935. This one made all the Africans all over the world and made them shocked and annoyed of the Mussolini's acts on the Ethiopians. Therefore, this brought in different advantages, where the Africans started mobilizing funds, weapons and soldiers to liberate Ethiopia. Therefore, in 1941, we are trying to see that Italy was defeated once again in Ethiopian soil. This caused the second victory brought by Africans and made them to realize that that armed resistance was only at the meaningful nations. Therefore, it made Africans to revenge against those people, and Ethiopia emerged as the winner, hence resulting into the rise and growth of nationalism within Africa at large. Then the other that you can also talk about is what we call the missionary activities. The missionary activities also was another factor to consider. With this missionary activity, we are trying to look at the growth of African nationalism, how it is spread upon the missionary activity. They are saying that they introduced the Western education. This Western education, what it emphasized, that it taught a subject that like history, which exposed the Africans to the liberation struggles and also the various people. For example, the French Revolution of 1789. Then also they emphasized with the free ideologies, or what you can term, they emphasize the free factors, that was equality, liberty, and brotherhood. This inspired Africans, or they lost the desire of Africans, hence also resulting into what we call the rise of African nationalism. And on top of that, therefore, we add also other parties that were formed, that these Africans tried now to join into, so that to fight against the European domination within Africa. These acted as factors, or acted as support to liberate all the Africans within different states of Africa. Then the other that we can also talk about can be the Egyptian Revolution. The Egyptian Revolution, that is 1952, also influenced the growth of African nationalism. In 1952, we are trying to see that the puppet regime of King Farouk was brought to the end, and we are trying to see that Abdel Nasser lost to power in 1970s, and here we are trying to see that he tried to agitate for the nationalistic ideas, and therefore he gave a financial and military support to a number of Africans to fight for their countries in terms of getting independence. For example, they talk about the UNC, that is the Uganda National Congress of Uganda. It was given some assistance. Then talk about the National Liberation Front of Algeria. Then also MNC, the Movement of National Congress. Those countries we are given support in order to fight for also their rights by Governor Nasser, after having taken over the leadership from King Farouk. Then the other we can talk about is what we call the development of mass media, or mass media. This one, it was the time when we tried to see that very many countries started acquiring knowledge, because these people had Africans that had gone to different institutions of learning. We had what we call the African elites that founded a number of newspapers, talk about magazines, radio stations. This we are trying to talk about different things that try to happen within Africa. Different magazines we are also documented. Then talk about different states here in Africa. We are being formed. The Accra Evening News was one of them. In Uganda we had Munno. Then also in West Africa we had West African Pirate. Those were some of the media presses that these people had by that time, that we are trying to fight against the against the colonialist regime at large. We talked about Radio of Cairo, then talked about Radio of Accra, and very many others. These were the seeds of nationalism that were sown in order to spread the news against the European domination in Europe, and to get rid of the colonialists. However, for now we are going to be stopping here, where we shall be picking up from next time.